Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Defensive Apologetics Training Agency, or DATA. My name is Branson. Today, we're going to review the most popular video from the Atheist Experience YouTube channel. To be clear about our purpose, we're not looking to debate these guys. We're not trying to argue with them or change their minds. Why? Because arguments are for honest people. These guys, like most YouTube atheists, are narcissistic liars who spend the vast majority of their time manipulating people to inflate their own egos. Even proving them wrong will not change their minds, so we're going to shake the dust off of our feet and focus our time and energy on helping people who are actually interested in knowing the truth. So if you want to learn how to see the manipulation and become immune to it, this channel is for you. So let's get started. 10, 9, 1, go.
My question, I guess, was just, I don't understand how anyone could be an atheist. I mean, I live my life, I try to live my life, to serve God and to be a good person. And when she said, oh, well, I talked to these atheists, I said, ow, yeah, I don't know. So I don't know what.
Have you called the show before? Maybe?
Pardon me?
Have you called the show before?
No,
Okay.
I hadn't heard of y'all.
Before we continue, just take a moment to note here, the caller doesn't exactly know what she's doing. And this is what atheists crave. They want somebody that's in the dark, that doesn't understand the debate, doesn't understand their intentions. That way they can prey on them. So be aware of that.
Okay, so you say that you don't understand how anyone can be an atheist. To be clear, when I say I am an atheist, for example, I mean there's a bunch of people saying this God exists, that God exists, Yahweh, Jehovah, Allah, Vishnu, and I say I don't see it.
Okay, so this is a tactic that a lot of people miss. And what he does is he's defining atheism. He's also doing something else that's more subtle, and that is that he is trying to put the God of every religion on par with each other. That there's no one that's more reasonable than the others, that there's no one that has better evidence or more believable. He's trying to just subtly level that playing field to say that all eye out for that, because what atheists will do is they'll try and trap you into defending every religion instead of just defending what you believe. And so it sends you on this wild goose chase of just trying to defend everything instead of what you actually believe. So watch out for that one.
Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying people that run around and set cars on fire and attack churches? Because I've heard that as well.
Is that what you do?
No. I just wanted to clarify, because that one of those two things is a lot more unbelievable and outrageous.
Okay, the next technique that you need to watch out for that they're going to use, they are starting to build this idea in your head that atheists normally behave like Christians. Now, the only reason these guys don't attack churches and set cars on fire is because they've been raised in a Christian nation, or a nation where Christian values are still very prominent. At least a lot of them are. And the reason that they're appealing to this is because they want you to think that, oh, your values, all your Christian values didn't actually come from Christianity, even though they did. The only reason they can appeal to those things as even being wrong or problematic is because of the Judeo-Christian worldview, but they want to discard that as much as possible and pretend that they have just as good a track record for behaving and producing good in the world as Christians do, and they don't. They have the worst track record of any religious system in the world, and of course they would hate to be called a religious system, but atheism, for all intended purposes, is a religious system, and they have more bloodshed on their hands than any other religious system in the world. They hold the record. The most secular centuries are the most violent centuries, looking big picture, not just at small anecdotes.
But what do you mean by
atheist? Yeah.
Someone who doesn't believe in God.
I was a believer before. Are you wondering how I got to where I am, or would that be a helpful thing for me to tell you about?
This is the next trap to watch out for. Atheists want to plant the idea in your head that they know everything you know, that they've been exactly where you've been, but that they grew up, and that you're still an immature child. Regardless of what your life looks like, what their life looks like, regardless of how many more mature qualities you possess, no matter how immature they act, they want to get the idea in your head, ever so subtly, that you haven't become an adult who's learned to stop believing in God yet. And that's the lie that they're going to just plant with implications, with subtlety, not outright, because if they just say it, then you'll counter it easier. But when they just try and sneak it in there, it's much, much easier for people to accidentally bite into. So be careful with that one as well.
So for most of my life, I believed that a God exists, that it was the God of the Bible, vaguely. I was baptized and raised as an Episcopalian, right? So we would always go Easter and Christmas, but oftentimes we'd go as well, in between, just regular Sundays. And for, recently I've had to look back and be like, how religious was I when I was, religious? Like, how devout was I? Because it seems weird for me now to get into that mindset. And I found a whole series of prayers that I'd written down. And actually, after I went to Catholic high school, I started collecting rosaries because that kind of thing seemed really cool to me. So I believed devoutly, I prayed.
Let's just take a quick moment to point out this non sequitur. Collecting rosaries does not mean you were devout, period.
Etc. And then after a while, I bumped into some ideas and some questions. Okay, well, what is a reliable way of determining what's true, right? If someone stole the cookie from the cookie jar, how do you actually figure out who it is so that all the kids in the class will stop singing that annoying repetitive song, right? You investigate and you figure out if they've got chocolate on their hands, right?
Okay, pay attention to what he just said. He bumped into some ideas. He started asking, how do I figure out what is true? He's trying to figure out how to fill in the gaps in his knowledge. What is the problem with that? Well, there's actually no problem if that's all he did, is if he was just trying to fill in the gaps. But the problem is, anytime a Christian makes a inference, even a very proper and justified one, the atheist says, oh, well, that's a God of the gaps argument. If what you believe is just filling in a gap in your knowledge, then you're just making it up. And that's actually not a rational way of thinking at all. If you were to drop a basketball and then it goes straight towards the ground, and then that's your reason for inferring gravity and believing gravity exists, that's justified. But atheists don't want you to do that. They have to strawman it. They have to claim that you think it's a proof, and some Christians blunder it as a proof, but regardless, it is a good way of thinking. But the atheists will not consistently apply it, because if they did, then they would have to become Christians, or at least acknowledge that God exists. But they don't want to do that because it's not what they desire, is the bottom line. So be careful on this one. Again, be ready to distinguish between an actual God of the gaps argument and inference to the best explanation, because those are two different things, and learning how to apply them will be important, and we'll get to that more down the road here.
But what I found was the only time when I said, oh, okay, how do I figure out what's true? I kneel, I pray, and I think about what's going on in my head. The only time I used that method to figure out what's true was on questions of God.
Okay, this is quite the straw man. So he has this idea that if you have a question about God and you're a Christian, all you can do is kneel down and pray and think about the thoughts in your own head. Which, by the way, that's not what prayer is. I don't know if he meant to imply that or not, but that was strikingly close. But regardless, there are multiple ways in which you can figure things out about God. Prayer is a valid one, because when a person prays genuinely and in humility, they sometimes have revelation, and they can explain things better. They grow more. Those absolutely happen many, many times. So to discount it and to pretend that it's unique to questions about God, just totally dishonest picture. So beware of this. There are lots and lots of seminaries for a reason. We know that there are entire churches where people, discuss theology and questions about, the Bible and about God and about Jesus. They do these things because those are God-approved methods to do so. And so for him to just paint this picture like, oh, I just kneel down and I think about my own thoughts, and that's how I figure out questions about God, and that's all I can do, that's a totally false narrative he's painting. Don't fall for it.
And that was the only method I could use. And then I thought about, okay, well, we have cars and machines, and we have, amazingly, fantastic planes and computers. How did we determine how, electricity works, how we can design a plane that flies through the air and carries people with it? How did we figure that out? And I realized, like, okay, Well, we studied things that we could observe, and we tested them, and we improved it, and we tested them, and we improved it, and we tested them, and we improved it, right? 100 years ago, if you went into a university and you went into the science department, or you went into even mathematics, or, well, literature, you'd have an extra 100 years of literature now, right? You could go back and be like, hey, guys, here's this information from 100 years ago now. It's all updated. It's all new. If you took information from a theology department today and you went back 100 years, you would have nothing new to tell them, which kind of tells me about whether or not the methods being used to figure this out have evolved or developed or found anything new.
Okay, this one is like laughably stupid. So he is literally trying to argue that because we haven't had any improvements in theology in the last 100 years, then therefore the methods that were used to determine that Christianity is true must be invalid. He's just jumping around. There's no consistency to what he's saying. It's absolutely absurd. So imagine for a second that we took this argument and applied it to water. If 100 years from now we still think that water is made of hydrogen and oxygen, what would we say? Is that now invalid? Of course not. If you have the right answer, you don't need it to change. You can just have the right answer. That's okay. To try and take theology and put it in the place of technology is just a dishonest comparison. So a total load of garbage. Do not buy into this one. And then even at that, if you wanted something outside of such a simple example, take the existence of logic, the way that we use that. We're not gaining any new information about logic, but we use the rules of logic and we just keep using them and using them and using them because they've served us well, because they're reliable. So we don't need to change them. In fact, changing them is probably going to be an error the vast majority of the time. So don't buy this snake oil.
And given that they contradict each other, it sort of didn't lend any credibility to, well, okay, how did you come to this conclusion that there is a God?
Okay, so you remember like 2 minutes ago when he said that there was only one method that he could use was to kneel and pray and think about the thoughts in his own head, and now he's saying that there are multiple methods and they contradict each other. So as he's accusing the Christian world of contradiction, he is contradicting himself. There's the great irony in this, so don't miss that one.
And given that they contradict each other, and that was the only method I could use. The only method contradict, right? Like particularly in mathematics, they can say, oh, here's why 2 + 2 = 4. Here's a giant logical proof for why 1 + 1 = 2, and it's a huge breakthrough. Oh, how do you know that this is what makes, what is it, baking soda and vinegar expand? You can test it, you can figure it out, you can look at things on a microscopic level. Nothing like that exists for God.
Okay, there's a lot that I could say here, but let's just try and keep it to the basics. First, what he's saying here is that we don't have a way of testing if God exists and how he works. Like, we don't have a laboratory for God, and therefore, we don't have a good reason to believe he exists. And this is just categorically wrong. Okay, we don't have a laboratory where we figure out if logic is real and it works. We don't have a laboratory to figure out if truth is real and works, right? Though those things do not qualify for laboratory experiment. That's not their nature. And it's the same way with God. So there are good methods of testing, like does God exist, and then what is true of God, and we'll get into those in detail in another video. For now, we just need to acknowledge what he's doing is categorically wrong. Don't fall for this trap.
And humans all over the world come to very, very, very different conclusions about God.
Okay, so just because lots of people come to lots of different conclusions does not mean that one or a few of them are not correct. People disagree and come to different conclusions on scientific topics as well. That does not mean that there's not a right answer. So this reasoning is just terrible.
Oftentimes, 2 people that go to the same church or live in the same house come to very, very different conclusions about who to vote for, what their favorite movie is, what's fashionable, what's not, what the best food is. So if I'm looking at the way that people determine whether or not a God exists, it looks a lot like people trying to figure out what they like.
Okay, there are several errors here. The first one is that he's looking at a few individuals, or let's say it's even a bunch of individuals, that have used bad reasoning. And he is projecting their bad reasoning onto every religious person in the world. So projection is one problem. There's, of course, the problem of him not knowing good reasoning when he hears it. But then the last problem is, even if every religious person in the world just picked their religious beliefs based on what they liked, does that mean that all of them are wrong? No. See, he's still trying to base his beliefs on bad reasoning. Even if he tries to do the opposite, he's still letting bad reasoning control the outcome, which is just a terrible blunder. And of course, when you get to the point where you're actually broadcasting for atheism, it's no longer a blunder. He probably knows better, and he's lying on purpose. But that aside, don't fall for this mistake of thinking, oh, well, all Christians, they just choose what they like. That's not true.
And I know I've gone a little bit off the rails here.
Yes, he has gone off the rails.
For me, it's just I'm much like Jamie. I'm not convinced. I am, in fact, convinced that some of them are wrong and hopefully demonstrably so.
Okay, we should stop right here. So when an atheist says, I'm not convinced, we have to stop and think about the assumptions that are underlying that phrase. So the idea that he's trying to portray is that he can be convinced if the evidence was just good enough. But he already has enough evidence, right? Speaking to my already Christian audience here, we know that God is written on the hearts of man and that he doesn't need any external evidence. But if he wants external evidence, that's there too. But it doesn't matter because there's no amount of evidence that's going to change his mind. And most famous atheists have said something to this extent. They don't know what good evidence for God would even look like. So they have no idea what they're looking for. They're just wandering in the dark and trying to drag people into the dark with them. It's really very sad. But the point is this. If you keep approaching them, going, if I'll just give them enough evidence, enough reasons, make enough good arguments that eventually change their mind, you're wasting your time. If you find somebody that's in a genuinely humble position asking those questions, then by all means, take all the time in the world to answer them and be very thorough and stay humble yourself. When you've got guys like this, you've got to understand. They just want to look superior. And they're going to deny God regardless of the evidence that you throw at them. So even if you prove God's existence, it won't make a difference to them. As soon as you figure out the rules, they'll change. Because truth is not their priority.
But I realize there's countless claims about different gods. They can't all be correct, but they could all be wrong. I'm not assuming that all of them are wrong.
And that's just a lie. He is assuming all of them are wrong before the conversation starts. So he puts that in there subtly and just moves past it like we don't need to stop and consider it, like we just take his word for it. But this is what he's doing. He assumes that all religious claims are wrong because there's no amount of evidence that'll change his mind. That's called an assumption.
But of the many, how do I go about figuring out which, if any of these, are correct or even likely to be correct?
This is the great irony of modern atheism. So he literally just confesses in this video that he doesn't know how to even figure out which religious claims are likely correct. He's totally in the dark here, but he has an entire show dedicated to criticizing Christian belief. And he can't even figure out if they're right or wrong. And somebody in the comments can go, oh, well, he's not just criticizing Christians, it's all religious people. Okay, it doesn't matter. He doesn't know how to figure any of them out, and this is what he's criticizing. They have an entire show dedicated to something that they know nothing about.
And not to be glib, but I can probably, not off the top of my head, but I could probably come up with a list of 1,000 gods you don't believe in. And, you know, the old joke is that atheists just go one god further, but the other aspect of this is that Jews think that Christians are wrong. Christians think that Muslims are wrong. Muslims think that Hindus are wrong. You know, we are agreeing with all of them.
Okay, so he says, we agree with all of them. Well, he doesn't actually agree on their perspective, on their worldview. All he agrees is that the other perspectives are wrong, which is saying pretty much nothing. Because if you talk to the Muslim, of course, they think their perspective is right and the opposing ones are wrong. If you talk to the Jew, if you talk to the Christian, each one of them think that their perspective is correct and the other ones are wrong. Atheism is not unique. He's trying to project that atheism is somehow above this way of thinking, that they're outside of this system, and they're not. This is just another manipulation tool.
And we are baffled that any one person could reasonably justify saying, nope, this is the right one.
Yet, that's exactly what they're doing. As they sit there, saying that it's ridiculous for a person to think they can justify their religious perspective, they are actively promoting a religious perspective and think they are justified. Make no mistake, these guys will play word games, they'll redefine every word they need to in order to fit their narrative. They'll claim that they don't have a belief that God doesn't exist. They only lack belief in God, but that's nonsense. Believing that God doesn't exist and not believing that he does exist are the same thing. Phrasing your belief in the negative does not make it a different belief. That's just word salad. In a future video, we'll spend more time on epistemology, but in the meantime, let their hypocrisy be the first warning sign not to fall for this nonsense.
Sorry, we
I mean, I
did a lot of
know
talking.
that my God is real. My grandson, when he was 2, he had a tumor on his pituitary gland, and
I'm sorry
they
to hear
didn't
that.
want to treat it. They did the MRA. MRI.
Yeah.
MRI. Yeah.
Sorry.
No,
the
you're fine.
MRI.
You're fine.
And they did another one 6 months later. It was the same size, and they did another one 6 months after that, and it had shrunk. And they didn't. They literally did not do any treatment. And I don't know how that's possible without God. We were all praying for him and hoping he would be well, and he's doing real well now. And it's the last time they did the MRI, it had disappeared. I mean, I've seen miracles in my own life that. How else could that be?
Okay, so the caller kind of blunders here. The argument is not great. It's not deductive. It's not well laid out. Nothing like that. She kind of makes an inference, but it's not the best inference she could have made either. But regardless, we got to move past that for just a second. Before you hear their answer, ask yourself the question: what could she say to them that would change their minds? And you're going to quickly realize the answer is nothing. If she told them that she saw an angel, if that she parted a sea herself, like Moses parting the Red Sea, if she saw somebody walk on water, if she watched somebody rise from the dead, none of those things are going to change their mind. So that's the perspective you have to bring to the table when you're talking to these guys. Are they going to evaluate evidence objectively? Can they evaluate it at all? And they've already told us they can't. They don't know how to even test religious claims or how to think that one could be right and the other wrong. So no matter what she says, even if she'd made the best argument in the world, it wouldn't make a difference. So you need to keep that in mind as you listen to their answer.
So one of the things is, there are parts of the story that I have difficulty believing, that they're repeatedly doing MRIs and there's no treatment. But that may be the case. But we know that cancer goes into remission.
No, he was too young. They didn't want
That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. I'm not saying you're lying. I'm saying that I'm getting the second hand, so I'm trying to explain.
Okay, also notice here, when he says, oh, well, I'm getting it second hand, so I'm trying to explain, he's already said, well, there are parts of your story I'm having trouble believing. He's already assumed she's not a credible person, that what she says can't be trusted. We can't take her at her word. Why? Because if we take her at her word, then that would lead us to believe that God exists, because that's what she's going to tell us. So without any reason, he's already decided, oh, she can't be trusted. Or perhaps he has a reason. Maybe it's because she believes in God. Again, systematically ruling out all of the things he doesn't like, all the things he doesn't want to believe, because that's what these guys do. So just don't miss that detail either, because it's important when you're interacting with somebody to know if they're just going to call you a liar as soon as you say the thing they don't want to hear.
We know that cancer goes into remission. We know that tumors shrink. You started by saying you know your God is real, and then you went to the story about your 2-year-old was a grandson, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then what you said about that is, I don't know how that could happen without God. That is a claim that is not, I know God did this. It's, I can't come up with any other explanation other than God. And yet there's no demonstration that there is a God, could be a God, or that a God could do this. There's a logical fallacy involved in your reasoning that is, I can't think of any other explanation, so I'm going to go with this one. And even if you could do that to say, you know, hey, my dog came in wet. I don't know how that could happen unless it was raining, is not in any way confirmation that it's raining. It's a mistake in reasoning.
Okay, so here I want to make one of the most important distinctions that Christians should make when we're talking about reason and belief and evidence. So he says, well, if you don't know why the dog got wet, that doesn't prove that it's raining. That's technically correct. But what if she believes that it must be raining outside because the dog came in wet? And there are no neighbors around for 100 miles, and there's no place for the dog to swim within 100 miles. Are we now justifying this belief? Well, to insist 100% that it must be correct would still be wrong. But if it's the best explanation on the table, and that's what we choose to believe, the belief becomes rational. It is the most rational belief. If you say, well, what about a kid with water balloon? Well, again, what if you don't have kids? What if you live alone with a dog? You can go down the line further and further as you start eliminating other possibilities and narrowing down what it is that can make the dog wet, and you come up with rain as your only answer. Well, then that makes that the most rational belief. And so what atheists like to do is to, instead of addressing the evidence and coming up with the most rational belief, they just jump to the question of, oh, did it prove it? And they find somebody like this who blunders the argument, and then they use that as their be-all, end-all for their debate skills. That's all they have to come up with. And so what we encourage you to do, all of our Christians who are wanting to share the gospel with people who are genuinely skeptical, is to not blunder this by going like, oh, it proves it. Like, stay away from the word proof, because proof's not what reasonable people are after. What you want to do is say, this is the best explanation on the table, and this is what's most reasonable and most rational. That's what we have available to us. And this particular example, of course, with the caller's grandson is not the best example that could have been given. There are a lot of better examples we'll go through in other videos. But for now, just focus in on saying, look, this is the best explanation, therefore it's the most rational. And the only way to make it less rational is to come up with a better explanation. If you can't do that, you're not choosing the most rational answer.
And so people can forever talk about the anecdotes of somebody had this illness, we prayed and it got better. The problem is, how do you demonstrate that the prayer had anything to do with it, or that there was a God who answered that prayer specifically?
Okay, so he asked the question first, how do you know the prayer had anything to do with it? And in this particular example, the tumor going away after the prayer, we may not be able to test this specific claim. This may not be the best example. Again, we've already covered all that. So I don't want to address that. What I want to address is, what if the person calling gave a really great example? Like, for instance, if the conversation went down the exact same way, but at this point, she said, well, an angel appeared to us and said, God has healed this child and has taken the tumor away. What is the response going to be from these atheists? Are they going to then believe her? Be like, oh yeah, that's sufficient evidence? Well, of course not. They're going to write her off as a lunatic. The thing you have to understand is that even if the caller is giving a bad example and not making a great argument, even if she blunders it, none of that is going to change the fact that there's nothing you can give these guys that's going to change their mind. If God comes to earth in a chariot of fire and says, I'm God, and he does 1,000 miracles in front of them, they're going to say, wow, that's a really powerful alien, or whoa, cool magic trick, bro. That's all they've got. No matter what you give to them, it's not going to change their minds. And again, I don't want to discourage you from giving good evidence to genuine skeptics, but these guys aren't genuine skeptics. These are just hardcore atheists that just don't want God to exist. And so when you're interacting with them, you have to keep in mind the issue is not the evidence. The issue is their pathology. It's their epistemology. It's the way they think and behave that is preventing them from acknowledging the truth. So don't get dragged into this like oh, she gave a bad example and all the examples must be bad. Don't run down this ridiculous road. These guys are in denial, period. And there's nothing that's going to change their mind until they address the problems within themselves.
Because we've tested intercessory prayer, and it works at the rate of chance, or worse, when people actually know they're being prayed for, it works less.
Okay, when he says, we've tested intercessory prayer, he's wrong. Intercessory prayer has not been tested. For him to say it works at the rate of chance, that is all incorrect. So there are several reasons why. First of all, we could say, like, who's this we you're talking about, because you didn't do any scientific tests, but we'll leave that alone for the moment. We'll link to an actual article from the National Library of Medicine. It'll be in the description box. And you can go check it out, because it has some positive outcomes with prayer and some negative, and there's a blend. But something that's in the article, which I'll read here so that you can get the idea. Near the end of the paper, they write, God may indeed exist and prayer may indeed heal. However, it appears that for important theological and scientific reasons, randomized controlled studies cannot be applied to the study of the efficacy of prayer and healing. In fact, no form of scientific inquiry presently available can suitably address the subject. So when he says, oh, we've tested it, and no, he hasn't tested it. And I'll give you an analogy to explain why they haven't tested it effectively at all, and why this article even acknowledges that. If you say have a teenage son, and he comes and asks you for the keys to the car 10 times, and it's on 10 different days, 9 of the days you say no, 1 out of the 10 days you say yes, you give him the keys to the car. Does that mean that asking you just works at the rate of chance? Well, of course not. It just means there are other factors. And we know with God working in people's lives, there are way more factors than can be tested in a laboratory somewhere. So to pretend that they've done this scientific test and figured out that, oh, prayer just doesn't do anything is absolutely ridiculous, because they cannot get all of the factors necessary into the test.
These personal anecdotes of, hey, I saw this and I don't have an explanation for it, awesome. Then the correct answer is you don't have an explanation for it. But you're trying to simultaneously say, I don't have an explanation, therefore it must be God.
Okay, to show Matt's error here, if I said, well, I don't know why things fall down, and so therefore it must be gravity. That's technically a bad argument, but it got me to the correct answer. Now, if I were to say, well, I don't know why things fall down, but gravity's the best explanation, so I'm going with that. Well, is that reasonable? Well, of course it's reasonable. And so, again, you got to watch these atheists who are going to try and back you into the corner like, oh, you didn't prove it, didn't prove it, didn't prove it. Who cares? You've got the best explanation on the table. That's what you go with. So he's going to throw a criticism at using God as the best explanation for anything in a moment. We'll deal with that in just a second. Let's continue here.
And that's how we got to every time somebody has offered God as an explanation, and we've gone on to find the actual explanation, the answer was never God.
Okay, think about what he just said. All of the times we offered God as an explanation and it wasn't God, it wasn't God. Well, duh, no one is disputing that. So what is he actually aiming for here? He wants to pretend that people never infer God correctly. He can't just say that, because when he's asked to back up his claim, he'll fail. But if he just plainly says that God is never the explanation, he will then have the burden of proof, which he can't handle. Think about this. What exactly has God been offered as the best explanation for that turned out not to be God? Don't give me some speculative nonsense. Give me a concrete example of where Christians said this must be from God, and you proved, not guessed or came up with something else, but proved that it wasn't. You could probably come up with a couple from a few overly zealous people, but there's not a huge global trend that has lasted for thousands of years like these guys imply. Also note what he said earlier, that if you don't have an explanation, then the correct answer is you don't have an explanation. Well, what is he doing here? He's plainly refusing to acknowledge that God is the best explanation. He's subtly admitting that even if God is the best explanation, he still won't acknowledge him. Why is that? Why is it okay to invoke gravity as the best explanation? Why is it okay to invoke protons, neutrons, electrons as the best explanations? Why is it okay to invoke Abraham Lincoln as the 16th president of the United States as the best explanation? Because none of those things bring the moral accountability that these guys are running from. Don't buy into this hypocritical load of flaming hot garbage.
So you don't think that works?
We know it doesn't work. It's been tested.
Yeah.
We already explained why this is a lie. He's just repeating the same lie from earlier. Let's continue.
You know, I've lost a lot of people in my life, and God has told me I'm going to meet them someday again.
So
I don't know how you can say that wasn't God.
Well, we're not saying it wasn't God. We're saying there's no reason to think it was God. That's different. But how does God tell you that you're going to meet these people again?
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, this is one of the things about the language when we start talking about God, and this is not a problem with you, man.
Okay, so at this point, they catch her in not having a good explanation. An explanation would probably be something like, that God laid this on her heart, forgot to put something in the mind and the soul of a person without using their five senses is not only possible, but it's common. So that there's nothing wrong with that. She just doesn't have the words to explain it to these guys. But let's say she did. And let's say it wasn't that way. Let's say she actually had a chorus of angels show up and give her this message. Is that going to change their mind? No. They're going to write her off that she's a liar or a lunatic. So don't get distracted that the caller doesn't have the right technical answer. She can't exactly explain this part of it, and therefore, she's just making stuff up. That's what they would like you to think. But again, this is manipulation. No matter what she experiences, no matter what she sees with her own eyes, no matter what happens, even in the realest of situations, if she brings that and tells these guys, it will not change their mind.
You've been convinced most of your life that someday you're going to go to heaven and you're going to be reunited with all your loved ones and everything's going to be wonderful. And the very idea that this might not be true is not just potentially terrifying, it can be almost traumatizing. And I think this is one of the disservices. Yeah, and oh gosh, I'm no good when people cry. I think this is one of the disservices.
No, I didn't. I was just thinking about my sister. I lost my sister when I was 13, and that I'd see her again, and I always believed I would.
This is one of the things where I think religions have done a disservice.
So the way these guys manipulate this woman into doubting the truth is just disgusting to me. It's so gross. And so what happens here is she admits one of her biases, because she's not in this to manipulate. She doesn't have to hide hers the way they hide theirs. She can say that, and then they prey on it. They jump on this to go, oh, well, see, this is the only reason that you believe in it is just because it gives you this false sense of comfort, which is just another lie. Because there are a lot of Christians that have people they very much love that they believe are not in heaven or not going to heaven. And there's a difficult side with this that comes with the comforting side. So to just write it off and just say, oh, well, this is just what religious people do in order to make themselves feel better. No, actually, a lot of the times, religious people feel worse for their belief about heaven and hell and about eternal life. It's not all comforting. There are parts of it that are very not comforting. So these guys will, of course, ignore that and just pretend that all religious people make this story up to make themselves feel better. And if you actually look at the negative consequences of the story, you know that's not true. It doesn't work that way.
Death is a natural part of life. And what religions have done, it's awful.
Yeah.
And what religions have done is put death in a context that eases people's frustration, anxiety, mourning by propping up a story. Oh, I'll get to meet them again.
So as we just addressed, that's not true. In many cases, and I'd say in almost all the cases that I know, Christians have to deal with the reality that there are people that they've loved and cared about that are not going to be in heaven. So to just say, well, religious people just make this up for comfort, no. If they're just going to make it up for comfort, everyone would be universalist, but that's not how it works, because that's not reality.
Now, even if that were true, which we not only don't have good reason to think is true, there's good reason to think that there's no such thing as a soul or anything that of me that could exist anywhere else.
Okay, he says there's no reason to believe there's anything like a soul. This is just a lie. This is ridiculous. Okay, the fact that you are awake, that you're perceiving, that you're aware, that you're thinking, all of those things are overwhelmingly strong indicators that you have a soul, that there's some part of you that is not merely physical, because you can mix all the chemicals you want and add all the electricity you want. It's not going to wake up. And the fact that you are awake and aware is a very, very strong indicator of the soul. So this is like the gaslight of the year for him to say, like, oh, there's no good reason to believe. Well, yes, there's plenty of good reason to believe. So if you would like a little bit more extensive research on this, Michael Egnor is a great resource. I'd recommend looking him up. Check out some of his videos and articles and such. But in the meantime, don't buy this nonsense from these guys.
But if instead we told people that we have no good reason to think that there's an afterlife, That gets people to focus on treating people right in this life and making the most of it and valuing it, so that when death comes, apart from instances where it's just a surprise shock, I can't imagine a parent losing a child, but it helps us to deal with it better. And if it turns out then that there's an afterlife anyway,
bonus.
Okay, it's a bonus.
It won't be a bonus for these guys.
But at least not depending on the afterlife encourages us to do better in our interactions in the one and only life that we know we get.
So now this guy claims that if we just stop believing in an afterlife, we will be better citizens. If we just dispense with our thoughts of eternal life, we'll make better use of our lives and appreciate them more, something like that. So now, obviously Christians and atheists have very different standards for what better looks like, but think about it. What have Christians and atheists actually done in the world? Well, Christians invented the sciences. You can see the link in the description box and go see the list of all the Christians who invented the various sciences. They also invented the modern hospital, and they landed on the moon. They took the Lord's Supper while they were there. You should Google that to read about it. It's fascinating. The majority of Nobel Prize winners have been Christians. Religious people as a group are much more generous than atheists. When atheists get into power, they murder the most innocent people within their reach. Think of Joseph Stalin, think of Jim Jones, think of Mao. Christians have provided most of the resources to escape addiction and substance abuse, and so on. Remember, atheists are master manipulators. So they will do their best to distort reality, but once you see through their nonsense, it's really obvious that atheism utterly fails to produce better lives and societies. Becoming an atheist doesn't help you do anything better. I mean, just look at their YouTube channels. If you watch Christian content, it's made for helping people. Lots of videos that help people to be more calm and peaceful, that help people to live better lives. It's what the majority of Christian content is. Atheist YouTube channels are literally just thousands of hours of atheists being hateful and condescending towards Christians. And occasionally they make a science video because it makes them feel smart, but that's the extent of it. So this guy's claim that we would do better if we stopped believing in an afterlife is just bull. Seriously, if an atheist makes this claim to you, you should just ask, why hasn't it worked for any of you?
If you don't think you get to make up for it later, you tell people you love them more. You show that you appreciate them more. You exercise a bit more patience, or at least you can. Not everybody's going to.
Yeah.
So now he's trying to add a reason as to why his fictitious world works the way it does. Well, the real reason is because it's all in his head. It's fiction. He's making it up as he goes. In the real world, Christians by and large do not see eternal life as a chance to fix the things we got wrong down here. Real Christians see this life and the next one as a gift that we didn't deserve. And in turn, that makes people more appreciative. Now, a quick side topic that's worth noting. If you meet an atheist that's really, really nice, they're just super kind, that's not actually a good thing. Why? Well, what if a really nice child predator gives candy to a child to lure them into his van? Does that make him good? Was his act good? Of course not. That's grotesque. His supposed act of kindness is just a tool for luring a child into abuse. It's not good at all. In the same way, a really nice atheist is doing a great job of leading people to hell. His kindness is not in any way good, it just helps build the deception.
After I was 13 when she died, so that was really hard. I told the Catholic priest because I was real sad, and I told him about what happened, and he told me she was in hell. Or no, he didn't say it that way. He said that
he said something to those effect, which is another example of how religion
she
really
couldn't be in paradise or whatever.
So that explains why you're not Catholic.
And I yelled at her the last time I saw her.
Okay, so note what he's doing here when he says, well, that's why you're not Catholic. He is saying that this woman just completely runs on her emotions, that she just is helplessly biased and everything she thinks is because of the bias. Now, given I don't know the woman who's calling in here, that might be the way she operates. But what's a problem is that he will then project that bias onto every single person who believes in God. In the way he talks to them and when he debates them, every single time he assumes it's just their bias, it's just what they want. And that's not true. He pretends that her bias is everyone's bias, and that if it's everyone's bias like he assumes, then there's no good reasons. There's so many errors in his reasoning, it's disturbing, but they're not just errors, they're lies. Because these guys are here to manipulate you.
Yeah.
But
This is the thing, and it actually gets worse than this. It's not just about propping up what is almost certainly false hope.
Okay, he says almost certainly false hope. Why is it almost certainly false hope? He hasn't given us any reason for that. All he's done is taken one woman's bias and then he's projected it onto the rest of the Christian world. That's it. How does he know that somebody else didn't have an angel encounter? How does he know that somebody else didn't watch Jesus walk on water? He has to assume that everyone else who's had a religious experience of some sort, all of them must be wrong. It's a very arrogant statement. Yet, when he is asked about this, he pretends like he's humble, like he just doesn't know. He's on the fence. But then he's very, very confident to say that it's wrong. This is one of those things that narcissists do, is that they pretend that they are dominant, that they are stronger, that they know better, and then as soon as you call their bluff, they pretend to be the victim. And it's the same thing with his level of confidence. Like, oh, I just don't know. I'm the innocent bystander. And then as soon as you're not on the offense, when you're on defense, then he starts attacking with, well, it's almost certainly false. This is how they play their game. And it's horribly manipulative, and you need to be ready for it.
It fundamentally changes the way we interact with people. And yet, here's the thing. There are countless different views about an afterlife. If the Catholics are right, maybe you don't meet up. Oh, and by the way, if the Catholics are right and you're not a Catholic, you're not going to meet up with anybody anyway.
Yeah.
And so
we can hang out.
Okay, so when he says we could hang out, atheists actually do this fairly often. I've seen it a lot, that they will pretend like suddenly they believe in an afterlife, but that they're going to be in hell, but hell's going to be a place where they just hang out. That's where all the cool people are. Okay, there are several different views of hell. I'm not going to get into all of them, but regardless, none of them are going to be all the atheists hanging out like, hey, we did it, and they're celebrating. That version of hell is definitely wrong. And we can go over the evidence for that on another day, but just watch this. The atheists are going to subtly slip this in. They're like, oh, it's not going to be too bad. We're going to chill. Again, just dead wrong. Just one more thing that they're lying about.
I hear from atheists who've been longtime atheists, and yet they're still concerned about fears of a hell, the hell they were indoctrinated into.
All right, there are two things worth noting here. The first one is when he mentions atheists that are still worried about hell, he says it's because of the indoctrination. We'll get to the indoctrination part in a second. He says they're worried about hell even though they're atheists. And this is just one more piece of evidence that God's law is really written on man's heart, as the Bible says. But we'll get into that some more later. As far as the word indoctrination, that is a very manipulative choice of words. Again, he could have said the hell that they were taught about growing up, or the hell that they heard about most frequently, or there are several other ways he could have chosen to describe what they were taught. But he says indoctrination. Why? Because he assumes that all Christian teaching is indoctrination. He assumes that it's wrong without actually debating it in this conversation. And so with the woman on the phone here, he's projecting these ideas into the conversation as if they're just agreed upon. It's called begging the question. If you're having a debate with somebody and you just assume something that you know they disagree with in part of your conversation, that's called begging the question. So again, very manipulative. Got to watch out for this because they will insert false assumptions into the conversation as subtly as they can, as often as they can, and you've got to watch out for it.
And the answer that I tend to give is, how much time do you spend worrying about the hells of other religions that you weren't brought up believing in?
Okay, and his answer is a ridiculous one. He goes, how much time do you worry about all of the other hells? Well, most religions have a similar picture of hell, which is interesting. But regardless, if they are worried about a particular one, he is still going to automatically attribute it to how they were raised, when maybe it's actually a piece of evidence that it's real and they should be concerned about it. But, of course, he's not going to actually consider those possibilities and weigh them and look at the evidence and then make the conclusion based on that. He's just going to assert that they're only worried about it because they were indoctrinated into it without considering the evidence at all. So, again, watch out for the way he just bakes in these false assumptions.
My thing is, as an atheist, I don't have any reason to think that anything about me will survive my death. I don't think there's a soul. I don't think there's an afterlife.
Okay, so there are a couple of things worth noting here as well. When he says he has no good reason to believe any part of him will survive his death, that's not true. Again, even if you don't think it's a very good reason at first. If you were to give it enough time, enough thought, and consider it, just being alive, being awake, is enough reason to think that some part of you is more than just chemical. Because there's no amount of chemicals you're going to mix in a lab that will wake up. And so if that's really all we are, then there's no reason for us to be awake. And it's just irrational to think that it's going to happen eventually. So it's a very, very strong indicator that there is something about us not chemical that would potentially survive and go on to another life. That aside, when he says he doesn't have a good reason, just remember, he's not the standard of evidence. Okay, if you are picked up by an angel tomorrow and he circles you around heaven and you meet God face to face and you come back to earth and you tell him all about it and he goes, well, your word doesn't mean anything, I don't have a good enough reason, you would still know the truth even if he doesn't think so. So just keep that in mind. No matter how many times he tells you that you don't have a good reason, how many times an atheist goes, well, I'm not convinced, the evidence isn't good enough for me, they're not a good standard of evidence in the first place. So don't get dragged into this trap of trying to make them a standard of evidence. Sometimes the best thing you can do is go ahead and address that they are a terrible judge of reason, terrible judge of evidence, that they're not good at this. Because that's the real issue in most of these conversations, most of these debates with atheists. That and the fact that they're lying.
And I could spend my entire life sad and miserable and depressed about the fact that I'm not going to get to go be with Jesus or whoever or meet my loved ones again.
Okay, when he starts to say, well, I could spend my life sad and depressed about not getting to go be with Jesus and my family, we have to pause. First, that there's a very, very little chance that he actually wants to meet Jesus. I'm like about 99% sure he doesn't, based on the way he talks about and to the people who believe in Jesus. But that aside, he's starting to project this image like, oh, well, I could be depressed and sad about all this stuff. He's depressed and sad anyway. Look it up. He's been struggling with depression for years and he's had multiple breakdowns. So when he's projecting this image, just understand that this is another lie. They're like, oh, he's just doing fine because he let all that stuff go. He's not doing fine. He's not been doing fine for years.
And all that would do is make my life worse. If in fact this is the only life that I get, which is what the evidence points to so far.
Okay, so when he says what all the evidence points to so far, what evidence? So if you were to actually ask him that, he's not going to give you any. He doesn't have any. He doesn't have any great evidence that there is no afterlife. All he's going to do is he's going to ask you, well, what's the evidence for an afterlife? And then if you don't have something, then he's going to say, well, and he's going to give you this Russell's teapot argument on why you should assume the negative, and it's not actually going to be positive evidence. It's just going to be him assuming the negative, and we'll get into why that's a problem in another video as well. But just remember, he's pretending he's got lots of evidence that there's no afterlife. He doesn't.
Then it's in my best interest to not dwell on the way things aren't, but to focus on, as best I can, the way things are.
But he's not focusing on the way things actually are. He's focusing on the way he wishes things to be. But then he projects onto the Christian world his own error. He's saying all the Christians just are focusing on what they wish to be. That's actually what he's doing right now.
And this is why the kind of ancient notions of some religions, I think, are poisoning our interpersonal relationships, to the point where if you don't believe what I believe, and let me take that out of you and me. There are parents who disown their children if they identify that they're an atheist.
Okay, so he says here that some parents will disown their kids if their kid becomes an atheist. And there's so many different cases. For him to just make this generalized statement is just helping to paint a false narrative. Because it happens the other way too sometimes, that you have atheist parents, really anti-religious parents, that disown their kid when he becomes a Christian. That also happens. And he could try and come up with numbers saying it happens more often this way and not that way. And sometimes, when the kid becomes an atheist, and they just become so arrogant and hateful and full of themselves that the parents can't tolerate being around that anymore because it's not wise and it's not healthy, that breaks it too. So sometimes they're not even at fault for it. But each case individually is different. But he's trying to make a generalized statement based on anecdotes that, well, this is what Christianity has done to them. It's just made them all disown their kids. just over a small disagreement. And it's not a small disagreement unless he's right. Again, this is begging the question against the Christians.
We have to find new homes for them.
Okay, I am highly skeptical of this. He says we have to find new homes for them. Who is this we that is finding new homes? Who are they finding the new homes for? I'm guessing that this is all just a nonsense, that it's a lie, that he's just pretending that he's out here helping people who've just been kicked out of their house, and that they're underage and couldn't get their own house. Maybe he is helping fully grown adults who just won't go get a job, enabling instead of actually helping. I don't know what the situation is, but the idea that he's actually being helpful to people in the situation, very, very far-fetched. But if there is any evidence of this, by all means, drop it in the comment section below.
I don't care
Well, I would
if my
never do that.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. And good for you. If my child turned out to be a serial killer, I would say all day long that they were absolutely horrible, that they'd done horrible things and were in fact terrible people, and yet I would still love my kid.
Okay, so you have to keep in mind when he says, well, I would still love my child even if they were a serial killer. Well, he doesn't actually love anybody. Again, he's using the people who watch his videos and this woman who's called in, he is using them to prop up his own ego. He's not actually loving any of them. So the idea that he's gonna, continue loving somebody even if they did something horrible, very, very unlikely. And he clearly doesn't love any of the people that he debates, and he doesn't love any of the people that he gives advice to, because he's constantly giving bad and misleading advice. So again, every little lie in here, we're not going to catch all of them because there are just so many. But I want you guys to notice how, as he projects onto the world that like all these Christian people are bad, he's just trying to find the rebellious teenagers who might have stumbled across this video and get them on his side for his own validation. There's no love involved.
And yet, merely for disagreements about not just whether or not there is a God, but which God's the right God, which afterlife's the right life. Should men be able to have sex with each other? Should women be able to have sex with each other? Which is less objectionable generally, which I find kind of hypocritical. But all of these things that drive us apart tend to come from religious ideas that nobody can prove. Oh, well, it's just opinion, dude. Yes, but you're legislating your opinion and you're treating other people based on that opinion.
Okay, two things worth noting. First, when he says the Christians will be like, it's just opinion, I don't know any Christians that have ever said that on these topics. So they're probably not saying it. He probably just made that up. But if you do know of a Christian that's actually said that about these topics, they're mistaken. And I grant that. But he goes on to list three things that he thinks it's ridiculous for people to have broken relationships over. That is belief in God, belief about the nature of God, which he'll say which God, and then the third one was homosexuality. So he is begging the question by listing these as examples of unnecessary things that religion causes us to fight over. See, if Christianity is true and Yahweh exists, then these three are extremely important questions. So for him to talk to this Christian caller and just be like, well, of course, we know these things are ridiculous and religious people fight about them, they're only ridiculous if he's right. So for him to bring that into the conversation as an example begs the question. So again, watch out, because this is the atheist game, is to put assumptions into the conversation that you never agreed to. They beg the question over and over and over, and you've got to be prepared for it, because again, you're going to have a tendency to want to get along, and just to assume that they're going to get on the same page with you, and then you both reason and exchange ideas from there. That's not what they're doing. It's one manipulation tactic after another. So be prepared for it.
What people believe matters.
Actually, he has no reason to think that anything matters. Not to say that nothing does matter, but again, he has no reason based on his standard of evidence. Just keep that in mind.
And I think religions not only can't demonstrate that they're true, but I think that they've done a great deal of harm and are continuing to do so.
Well, we already established earlier in the video that that's not true, so we won't waste any more time on that claim.
I think y'all were real nice. I mean,
they were not nice. They were condescending and manipulative.
Here, I mean, bottom line, if I believed I would never see my sister and my brother again, I don't think I could bear it. And
And that's my objection to
Y'all are
religion.
talking logic.
No, they are not. Again, they may occasionally make a logical argument, but anytime they do, it's built on a faulty assumption. And there are several non sequiturs during this video as well. So bless this poor woman's heart that she doesn't understand logic well enough to see that they're not using it. And they're manipulating her throughout this whole call. It's disgusting. Again, don't fall for this. Please equip your friends, your family to see through this nonsense.
I think also we're talking humanism because this is my objection to religion. Yeah. If in fact you had grown up with the understanding that death was almost certainly the end, you would have the tools to bear it. But
okay, so notice what he's doing here. He's saying that if she was not raised in a religious household, then she would have the tools to deal with this. And I gotta say, I've met lots of religious and non-religious families, and the religious ones tend to deal with death better than the non-religious ones do, including these guys. Again, Matt has issues, but that aside, think about it objectively for a second, my experience taken out of it. He's trying to say that religious people just make up this story where everybody's happy and together at the end, and they just do that in order to make themselves feel better. Well, if that was the case, why do we believe in any sort of hell? Right? You realize that doesn't make any sense. And so on one hand, they will accuse us going, oh, you just make up stories to make yourself feel better. And then when we bring up a doctrine like hell, they'll go, well, why would you believe in something so horrible? They do this because they're just manipulating you. Their own theories about you as the Christian are wildly inconsistent with each other. So you need to be prepared for that, realizing that this whole objection is just nonsense. And again, Christians historically and in my own life have done a much better job at dealing with death than non-believers, and do with that what you will. The rest of the video is just these two guys trying to play therapist, and there are plenty of errors in there that we could go through and we could correct them, but they don't really serve our purposes for this channel. So we're going to end the video right here. Thanks for watching. I hope this helps open your eyes to how atheists operate so that you won't be manipulated by them. Please like this video, share it with everybody, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so that you'll know when we upload again. Until next time, I'm Branson, and this is Data. God bless.